Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and I'm here for a best of list, and it's going to be for best albums of 2010. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So kicking off the list is Teenage Dream by Katy Perry. I couldn't think of a better pop album to start off this video with than Teenage Dream, because this is a really great album from start to finish. Yes, there may be one song on the album called Pearl that I'm not the biggest fan of, but I still don't think that's a bad song. So, I did review this album on the channel more recently, so if you guys want a more in-depth review, then check out the review, but I still like this album a lot. It's one of my favorite pop albums of 2010 and of all time. It's how great of an album it is to me. So it's an album I just never get sick and tired of. It's definitely a great album. You have songs like the title track Teenage Dream, Last Friday Night TGIF, California Girls, Firework, Circle the Drain, amongst other really great songs. So Teenage Dream by Katy Perry, definitely a great album to kick off this list with. Definitely my favorite Katy Perry album. I don't think her other albums are bad, but this one takes the top for me. Great album. So next on the list is going to be The Oracle by Godsmack. Some people, when they mention this album, they have it a lot lower in their album rankings for whatever reason, but I never understood why, because I don't think it's a bad album at all. It's not my number one Godsmack album, but it is in my top 3. Still definitely a good album though. I don't think it's that bad of an album like people make it out to be. It's pretty overlooked and underrated to me, so I think this album gets too much hate, and I think it's overlooked, and it's a very underrated album from Godsmack in my opinion. Have songs like Crying Like a Bitch, Love, Hate, Sex, Pain, Good Day to Die, and many other great songs. So this album is definitely worth checking out if you're a fan of heavier music. Great album. So the next album in the list is going to be The Final Frontier by Iron Maiden. It is true that this isn't one of Iron Maiden's best albums, but I still don't think it's a bad album at all. I just think it's kind of way too long when it comes to some of the songs and just the album itself in general. It can be a boring album, but boring doesn't always mean bad. So I guess I'll cut Iron Maiden some slack on this album and still include it on the list, because I don't think it's a bad album. It just can be boring at times since it's an album with longer songs. Still not bad though, just kind of boring at times. Still not that bad of an album though, so for that I'll keep it in the list. So next is Nightmare by Avenged Sevenfold. This is my favorite album from this band. I just really enjoy this album. It was their first album without their original drummer, the Rev, due to his passing in 2009. And this album had Mike Portnoy, formerly of Dream Theater, on drums. My mistake there, guys. So yeah, former Dream Theater drummer Mike Portnoy was in Avenged Sevenfold for a little while on their album Nightmare, and I think he done pretty good on the drumming on this album. You have a lot of great songs like the title track, Nightmare, So Far Away. I think another great song on there was called Natural Born Killer, definitely a good song, and many other good songs. So this album, definitely a great album and my favorite from Avenged Sevenfold. I don't think their other albums are bad, but this one, ever since I've been a big fan of this band and gotten into their music a few years or so ago, this album has never left for being my favorite for the band. So, Nightmare by Avenged Sevenfold, amazing album. So next in the list is going to be For We Are Many by All That Remains. This is another album from a band that kind of gets a little bit too much hate, but I still don't think it's a bad album. Once again, I just don't get why some fans of this band don't like this album too much, but I don't think it's a bad album at all. I actually think it's pretty good. Yes, it's true, I may not listen to this album or any songs from it as much as I used to, but I still like this album from All That Remains, and it would be in my top 3 because I don't think it's that bad of an album like some of their fans or other fans in metalcore think of this album. I don't think it's a bad album. So, for We Are Many, definitely makes the list. Good album. Check it out if you're a fan of any kind of metalcore or even any kind of metal in general. It's definitely a good album. So next is The World Is a Thorn by Demon Hunter. It is true that this is one of Demon Hunter's weakest albums, but I don't think it's all that bad. I would say it isn't one of their best, but I don't think it's bad though. So, it is one of my least favorites, like I said, but I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's horrible. Just kind of an album that just feels like another Demon Hunter album because they've done way better than this album, believe me on that. Still good album, just not one of their best. But since I'm still a fan of the album, I figured I'd still include it in the list. So next is going to be Monument by Miss May I. This is a very good album from these metalcore guys. So Monument, I think it's one of the best Miss May I albums. I haven't got to hear all of their albums in full. I think I only got to hear like their first 3 albums in full, if I remember correctly. And I think this one is one of their best. So, Monument, definitely a good metalcore album from this great metalcore band. And, yes, I know this band is kind of like As I Lay Dying, but I still think they're a good band. You can pretty much hear As I Lay Dying within this band, but I still think Miss May I and their album Monument definitely deserves a place on this list because it's definitely a good album for sure. So next is Animal by Kesha. I know Kesha isn't one of the best singers or anything like that. She's just average at best in my opinion. But I still like some songs from her album Animal, so for that I'll include the album on the list. Songs like TikTok, Blah Blah Blah, Your Love Is My Drug, and some other good songs. So Animal by Kesha makes the list. Next album in the list is going to be Chasing the Grail by Falsey. For whatever reason, this album just seems to be kind of underrated for Falsey. I don't really hear many people ever mention this album because it's a good album from everything I've heard from it. Sure, I haven't heard every single song on it in full, but I've heard a few or so songs here and there, and everything I've heard from it, I thought it was really good. So for that, Chasing the Grail by Falsey makes this list. Good stuff. Next album on the list is Ironbound by the thrash metal band Overkill. Definitely great metal here from these thrash metal legends. Great stuff. The title track is one of my all-time favorite Overkill songs. And I've heard a lot of people saying this is one of the band's best albums, which I'm not going to disagree with that, despite me not hearing the full album. Just heard maybe a few songs here and there, again, from this album. So yeah, Overkill and album, Ironbound. Great stuff. Next album is going to be Mechanized by Fear Factory. I think this album is kind of overrated, to be honest. I don't think it's bad, I just find it kind of overrated and overhyped because it's just an album of theirs that I don't really go back to much of, honestly, in full. Even though I am a big fan of Fear Factory, I think they're a great band that deserves more recognition. It's just something about this album that doesn't really resonate with me as much as some of their other albums. Still not a bad album though, and it does have the legendary Gene Hoglan on drums, so it's definitely a positive thing that I will say for this album. And the song Power Shifter, I think that's the best song on the album. Not a bad album, just Power Shifter. Just this heavy, aggressive, amazing industrial metal song, and honestly, it feels like it could have been on one of their 2000s albums or 90s albums. But yeah, this album though itself, I still don't think it's that bad. It's just not one of my favorites, but still not a bad album. So for that, it still counts and makes the list. So next is going to be Long Live the Kings by Cottonmouth Kings. This is a pretty good album from some of the songs I got to hear from it. Honestly, I haven't heard many Cottonmouth Kings albums in full, despite me being a big fan of this rap group. I haven't heard all of their stuff in full when it comes to all of their albums. I just know some of their songs here and there from this album and their other albums. But yeah, Long Live the Kings though is definitely a good album. You have a lot of good songs like the title track. It was really good title track. Fuck the Police with ICP was definitely good. Great When You're High was a good song. Reefer Madness was great. So yeah, this is definitely a good album from Cottonmouth Kings. So it makes the list. Great rap stuff. So next is going to be Fever by Bullet for My Valentine. This is one of my favorite albums from this band. It's just a really good album. It's not my number one. I'd probably have it in my top 3 for this band. But still definitely a good album, though. You have songs like Your Betrayal. Title track Fever was great. And a lot of other good songs. So Fever by Bullet for My Valentine, definitely a good album. And a lot of their fans would agree with me when I say it's one of their best. Definitely a great album for sure. So next in the list is going to be Bionic by Christina Aguilera. I know that this album has a lot of sexual songs, but I still don't mind it. I mean, I haven't heard every single song. I just know maybe 3 or 4 songs from the album. But one of these days I'll probably go and check it out in full since I'm a big fan of her music. But even though I haven't heard the whole album, just maybe 3 or 4 songs, I still wanted to put it on here because those songs that I've heard, I've really enjoyed. So yeah, Christina Aguilera's album, Bionic. Good stuff from everything I've heard from it. Next on the list is going to be Recovery by Eminem. I think this is a great album. Definitely better than Relapse and Encore both. I don't think those albums are all that bad. I just think Recovery is better than both of them albums. It's a great return for Eminem. Had a lot of great songs like Not Afraid, No Love, Love the Way You Lie, 25 to Life, Spacebound, so many other good songs. So yeah, Recovery, definitely a great return for Eminem in my opinion. So Recovery, definitely a good album from the rap legend Eminem. Great stuff. If you're a fan of rap, definitely check out this album because it's great. So next on the list is going to be Asylum by Disturbed. This is definitely a dark and heavy album from these guys. I mean, it's not my favorite album from them or one of my favorites, but I still like the album though. It's definitely a good and dark album. Definitely one of their darkest albums. Has lots of dark themes within the album itself and the songs involved on it. So yeah, this is definitely a good album, and I think it's kind of overhated by some other fans in the band, but I respect their opinions, even though I still think it's a good album. So Asylum by Disturbed makes the list. Next is going to be Audio Secrecy by Stone Sour. Definitely a good album from these guys. I mean, Stone Sour isn't a band I listen to all of the time, but Audio Secrecy is an album that I haven't really listened to in a long time. But I do have this album on CD. I just don't really listen to it that much. But I still like some songs on it though, like Hesitate. Hesitate is probably my favorite song on the album. It's definitely an amazing ballad from these guys. So yeah, this album is definitely worth checking out though. So yeah, Audio Secrecy by Stone Sour makes the list. So the next album is 1,000 Suns by Linkin Park. I know this album was kind of divided among the Linkin Park fan base upon its release back in 2010, but even with that being said, I don't think it's a bad album. Sure, It's not one of LP's best albums, but I still like the album though. Had a lot of good songs, like Riches and Kings was a great song, Iridescent was great, and so many other good songs. I know it's more of a electronic rock album instead of their more like new metal and even alternative stuff, but it still definitely is a good album from Linkin Park. So for that, it makes this list definitely great stuff. So the next album on the list is going to be Hands All Over by Maroon 5. I'll go ahead and say this now. This Maroon 5 album is definitely really good. It's like their last pop rock album because you guys already know in 2012 they released an album called Overexposed. And they've been a pop band since 2012, but with 2010's album Hands All Over, they still had their more funkier pop rock style, so it's definitely cool. Had some great songs like Misery, Never Gonna Leave This Bed, title track Hands All Over. You also had the bonus track with Christina Aguilera called Moves Like Jagger. Definitely a lot of other good songs. So yeah, Hands All Over by Maroon 5. Definitely a worthy album of being on the list. Great stuff. Next in the list is going to be A Year Without Rain by Selena Gomez and The Scene. Man, this is definitely a really good album. I mean, I don't really listen to Selena Gomez's music all that much these days, but I still think she's a really great and talented singer. And this album is no different than her solo material because it's definitely a good album. I really enjoyed some songs on it. The title track being one of those songs. I can't remember every single song name right now from all of the songs that I did get to hear from this album, but I still think it's definitely a good album from Selena and The Scene. So yeah, definitely a great album from everything that I've heard from it. So the last album in the list is going to be Creatures by Motionless in White. This is definitely a great metalcore album. It is one of the band's best albums. Lots of great songs like Abigail. I think there was a title track of the album. And some other songs. So yeah, Creatures, definitely one of Motionless in White's best albums. And one of my favorite metalcore albums of the 2010s. Definitely great stuff. So yeah guys, that's going to complete this video for best albums of 2010. Let me know y'all's favorite albums of this year, the year 2010. I'll have honorable mentions in the description of this video, per usual. So with that being said, I'll see y'all next time. Peace.